Welcome to Talk Treatises,
where we decode the architecture of society through its most pivotal texts.
I'm your host, and I'm really ready to get into the weeds today. Usually when we do a deep dive into the classics of philosophy, we're dealing with these very abstract, almost floating concepts, you know?
Right, like the nature of reality or what justice means in a total vacuum.
Exactly. Or how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. But today we are looking at a book that was written with just a surprising amount of adrenaline.
Oh, yeah.
It feels less like a quiet meditation and way more like a tactical strike.
It really is. It's a battlefield text. We're unpacking Mary Wollstonecraft's 1792 manifesto of Vindication of the Rights of Woman.
And I think the biggest mistake people make for you listening right now, the thing you might assume, is that you already know what this book is.
Right. They think, oh, it's the suffragette manual, or it's the very beginning of modern feminism. And while that is true in terms of its historical legacy, the actual content of the text is something much stranger and honestly much more intellectually aggressive than people realize.
Because it isn't just a list of policy demands, right? She isn't asking for, a quota in the Senate or a specific tax break for women.
No, not at all. If you go into this source looking for equal pay legislation or something modern like that, you're going to be disappointed. This is fundamentally a metaphysical argument.
A metaphysical?
Yes. She is arguing about the actual shape of the human soul. She is essentially looking at the architects of the Enlightenment and asking them, do you actually believe in your own logic? Or are you just massive hypocrites?
That tension right there is exactly what I want to explore, because the context here it's just vital. We are in 1792.
The world is on fire.
Literally. The French Revolution isn't just background noise, it is the main event. You have heads rolling in Paris. You have the rights of man being debated in literally every coffee shop in London.
The central thesis of the entire age is shifting.
Right, this idea that authority doesn't come from a king anymore, or a pope. It comes from reason, capital R reason.
Correct. The Enlightenment promise was actually very simple. Man is a rational animal.
Yeah.
And because we can think, we inherently deserve to be free.
But then Wollstonecraft looks around at this totally transformed society and sees this massive, glaring blind spot.
She sees the revolutionaries shouting about liberty in the streets while simultaneously keeping 50% of the human race in a state that, well, that looks suspiciously like slavery to her.
And this wasn't just a vague feeling of unfairness she had. There was a very specific trigger for this book, wasn't there? A guy named Talleyrand.
Yeah, Charles Maurice de Talleyrand-Périgord.
Yeah.
He's this fascinating, incredibly slippery figure in French diplomacy.
Slippery is a good word for him.
He really was. And he published this report on public education for the new French Republic, which was arguably the most enlightened government in human history at that exact moment.
And what did this enlightened report actually say?
In this report, he basically argues that boys should be educated to be citizens and leaders, and women. They should be educated purely to manage the home and essentially stay out of the way.
Man, that must have felt like such a betrayal to someone like her. Here is a revolution completely built on logic, and the logic just conveniently stops the exact moment it hits a gender line.
She took it as a deep intellectual insult. She actually wrote a Vindication in something like 6 weeks.
6 weeks? That is feverish.
It is feverish. And the best part is she actually dedicated the book to Talleyrand.
That is such a power move.
It really is. She's basically saying, I read this for you, read this, and then look me in the eye and tell me how you mathematically justify excluding half the human species from the kingdom of reason.
Wow. So let's get into the core argument she makes to him, because she dismantles the status quo in a very specific structural way. She doesn't just say, oppression is mean.
Right.
She argues that the way society treats women is actually creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That is the crucial insight of the whole text right there. The prevailing view in the 18th century, which was heavily promoted by men like Rousseau, whom we will definitely get to.
Oh, we're getting to Rousseau.
Their view was that women were, quote, fair defects, unquote. That they were naturally silly, naturally vain, obsessed with dolls and dresses by birth, and totally incapable of abstract thought.
Fair defects. It is such a patronizing phrase. It just implies, hey, you're pretty, but you're fundamentally broken.
Exactly. And Wollstonecraft counters this whole premise by saying you are confusing nature with nurture.
Right.
She argues that women act this way not because of their biology, but because they are systematically trapped in a system of what she calls perpetual childhood.
Perpetual childhood. That's a haunting concept when you really think about it. It suggests this sort of suspended animation of the mind.
It means they're never allowed to struggle. They're never allowed to fail or to learn hard truths about the world. They are completely protected, coddled, and told from birth that their only job in the universe is to be pleasing.
Pleasing to men, specifically?
Yes. And Wollstonecraft uses this incredible analogy of hothouse flowers to really drive the point home.
Right, I love this part. She says if you plant a flower in soil that is way too rich and you keep it locked in a greenhouse, it will bloom instantly.
It will look spectacular.
But the moment you take it outside into the real world, it just dies. It has no root system whatsoever.
Because strength and usefulness are completely sacrificed for immediate beauty. She argues that society has actively turned women into these hothouse flowers. They are highly decorative, but they are fundamentally weak because they've never been allowed to be anything else.
But then she does this thing, she flips the script with a comparison that I found genuinely shocking, especially for a book published in 1792.
You're talking about the soldiers.
Yes. She compares these supposedly frivolous, silly women directly to military men.
This is her absolute sociological masterpiece.
Yeah.
It is such a brilliant, counterintuitive leap. Because you have to remember, in the 18th century, the soldier is the absolute pinnacle of masculinity.
Right, the red coat. The brave defender of the realm. You would expect her to contrast women with them.
But she doesn't. She says they are exactly the same.
Which is wild. How does she justify that?
She looks purely at the structure of their lives. A soldier in a standing army is taught from day one to please his superiors.
Right.
He's incredibly obsessed with his uniform, his dress. He's obsessed with rank and etiquette and who bows to who. He lives entirely for the, quote, gallantry, unquote, of the moment.
He doesn't think critically, he just follows orders.
Exactly. So she's saying to her male readers, look at your army. These highly masculine men are gossips. They're obsessed with their appearance. Why? Not because they have female brains, but because they exist in a highly rigid system that rewards superficiality and blind obedience.
That completely destroys the biological argument right there. If a biological man acts exactly like a silly woman when you put him in a restrictive hierarchical environment, then the behavior isn't female. It's situation.
It's the environment, stupid.
Yeah.
That's essentially her argument. And this logical deduction leads her straight to her central axiom regarding virtue. This is the philosophical anchor of the entire book.
Okay, lay it out for us.
She argues that virtue must be unitary.
Unitary, meaning it has to be the exact same for everyone.
Yes. In her time, society believed there was male virtue, which was courage, reason, justice. And then there was female virtue, which was modesty, docility, patience.
Completely different sets of rules.
And Wollstonecraft says this is theological nonsense. If there is a God, and if there is absolute truth in the universe, then virtue is just virtue.
Right. Courage is good for a man, so it logically must be good for a woman.
Rationality is good for a man, so it must be good for a woman.
Because if you separate them, if you start saying, well, it's actually good for a woman to be weak or ignorant, you are effectively arguing that she shouldn't be human.
You are denying that she has a soul capable of salvation. Because how can you possibly save your immortal soul if you aren't allowed to use the rule of right?
What?
If your only moral compass in life is just whatever my husband tells me to do, you aren't a moral agent anymore. You're a pet.
That is heavy. And I think this seems like a really good place to bring in the rogues gallery. Because she isn't just shouting these theories into the void. She is actively attacking the specific intellectual who built this cage.
Oh, she names names.
And the biggest target on her board is Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
The irony here is just incredibly thick. Because Rousseau is the guy who wrote The Social Contract. He is the ultimate champion of human freedom and democracy.
But Wollstonecraft absolutely loathes his views on women.
She despises them. She focuses heavily on his book, Emile, which is basically his masterclass manual on how to educate the perfect, enlightened male citizen.
But Emile, the perfect citizen, has a girlfriend. Sophie.
Yes, Sophie. And Sophie's education is an absolute horror show compared to Emile's. Rousseau explicitly argues in the text that Sophie should be educated to be completely passive.
He literally says her strength lies in her charms and her, quote, natural cunning, unquote.
Cunning. That word comes up a lot in these sources, and it feels like Wollstonecraft has a deeply visceral reaction to it every time.
She hates that word.
To her, cunning is the tool of the slave. It's what you have to use when you don't have actual human rights.
Because if I can't demand respect from you based on my intellect or my legal standing, I have to trick you.
Exactly. I have to bat my eyelashes, I have to pretend to be helpless, or I have to manipulate your male ego just to get basic resources or what I want.
So Rousseau thinks he's describing this sweet, innocent, perfect wife for his citizen. But Wollstonecraft reads it and says, no, you're actually describing a manipulative liar.
She argues that this entire system of keeping women innocent actually makes them vicious. It forces them to be highly deceptive just to survive day to day.
And she asks the obvious question, how can you build a healthy marriage on that?
You can't. How can you expect to raise enlightened children when the mother of the house is essentially a con artist because society won't legally let her be honest?
It's a broken foundation. And it wasn't just Rousseau. She goes after these two guys, Dr. Fordyce and Dr. Gregory, who wrote these things called conduct books.
Yes, the conduct books. These were massive, massive bestsellers at the time.
Think of them as the rules for dating of the 1700s, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the advice in them was genuinely nauseating. They literally told women to actively hide their intelligence. They wrote things like, if you happen to know something, keep it a secret, because it will intimidate the men around you.
They even suggested women should pretend to be sick or frail because it makes a man feel strong to protect her.
That is just chemically toxic. Pretend to be an invalid so your husband loves you more.
Right. And Wollstonecraft reads this and calls it a system of dissimulation, just outright lying as a lifestyle.
She's indignant. There's this great point where she basically says, I do not wish women to have power over men. I wish them to have power over themselves.
And you can't have power over yourself if your entire existence from birth to death is just a performance for a male audience.
Exactly. And this links directly to the concept of sensibility, which we really should define for you listening. Because today, when we say someone is sensible, we mean they are practical and grounded.
Right, like wearing sensible shoes.
But in 1792, sensibility was almost a cultural fetish.
Yes. Sensibility back then meant hyper-emotionalism. It was the era of the fainting couch.
To be a person of pure sensibility was to be completely ruled by your nerves. You cry at sunsets, you faint at bad news, you are overwhelmed by a poem.
And men loved this in women because it made the men feel incredibly rational and steady by comparison. It's the whole hysterical female trope.
But Wollstonecraft systematically tears this down. She argues that if you are a creature of pure sensibility, you logically cannot be a creature of reason. You're just constantly reacting to the world, never actually understanding it.
You are a leaf blowing in the wind.
And if you are just a leaf in the wind, you cannot be a competent mother.
Which is the perfect pivot to her arguments on education, because she realizes she has to convince a skeptical male audience. She argues that the current system isn't just destroying women, it's destroying the kids.
It is her strategic genius. She knows the men reading her book are skeptical of women's rights, so she frames it as a societal benefit. She says, do you want better, smarter children? Then you need better mothers.
A mother who is a, quote, gentle domestic brute, unquote, which is a crazy phrase, cannot raise enlightened citizens.
She will either completely spoil them because she's emotional, or she will ignore them because she's vain.
So what does her proposed education actually look like? Because she drops a policy proposal in this text that must have sounded absolute science fiction at the time.
Oh, she proposes a national school system, which is wild enough. But specifically, co-education.
Boys and girls in the same room.
Educated together, studying the exact same subjects, including the hard sciences.
Why was that so revolutionary to her, beyond just the obvious girls learning math aspect?
Because she believed it would destroy the mystery between the sexes. She argues that if you rigidly separate boys and girls, you create this highly charged, artificial atmosphere.
Right. Men grow up viewing women as these mysterious alien creatures to be either conquered or put on a pedestal and worshipped.
And women grow up viewing men as these terrifying, distant masters.
But if they just sit next to each other in an algebra class at age 8.
They just become humans to each other. They become peers, friends. She desperately wants to replace gallantry, which she sees as deeply condescending, with actual friendship.
And she doesn't stop at just the mind either. She wants them to do gym class together too.
Yes. She openly challenges the physical weakness narrative.
Which is fascinating. How does she handle the biological differences in strength?
She's very rational about it. She openly admits that, generally speaking, men have a biological advantage in raw physical strength. She's not denying basic biology.
Right.
But she says, we don't actually know what the limit of female strength is because we have never, ever let them try to find it.
We bind their limbs with tightly laced corsets, we keep them indoors away from the sun, and then we point at them and say, oh, look, they're naturally weak.
It's a rigged game. She says, let them run outside, let them romp in the dirt, let them scrape their knees just like the boys. And then, after they let them develop naturally, Then we can measure their strength.
It's literally just applying the scientific method to gender. Stop assuming the outcome and actually run the experiment.
Exactly.
I want to move to the economic argument now, because this is where I feel like the short summaries of this book always miss the real nuance. She talks a lot about independence, but she doesn't just mean emotional independence.
No, she means cash. She means hard economics.
Virtue requires independence. She hammers that truth home again and again. It is very, very difficult to be a truly moral person if your actual physical survival depends entirely on keeping someone else happy.
Because if I have to make you happy just to eat dinner tonight, I'm not your equal partner. I'm your employee.
Or your prostitute. She actually goes there and uses that exact comparison.
She does. She calls marriage without fundamental equality legal prostitution.
Which is a heavy accusation.
If a woman marries a man she does not respect simply because she needs to be financially supported, she is quite literally selling her personhood for room and board.
So Wollstonecraft argues that women fundamentally need professions.
Yes. They need to be physicians, they need to be in politics, they need to be business owners, they need the literal ability to stand completely alone financially.
So that when they do decide to marry, it's an actual choice, not a desperate survival strategy.
Precisely. And this economic reality leads her directly into the political parallel, which I genuinely think is the most dangerous part of the book for the era she was writing in.
Because she explicitly links the tyranny in the home to the tyranny of the state. She compares the, quote, divine right of husbands, unquote, to the, quote, divine right of kings, unquote.
You have to remember, she is writing to literal revolutionaries. She looks at these men who just violently overthrew the King of France, and she says to them, you guys are absolute hypocrites.
You hate tyranny when it's in the Senate, but you absolutely love tyranny when it's in your living room.
You want to be free citizens in public, but you want to be unaccountable dictators at home.
And she warns them, right? She says, you cannot simultaneously be a lover of liberty and a master of slaves. It rots you from the inside out.
It corrupts the soul of the master just as much as the slave. And on a more practical level, she argues that slaves just make terrible companions. If you oppress your wife, she is going to drag you down with her.
Because she'll be petty, she'll be manipulative, she'll make your home life miserable.
Exactly. Make them free, and they will quickly become wise and virtuous. That is her ultimate promise to the men reading the book.
It's a promise, but it's also a challenge. She's basically saying, you're terrified that if women are actually free, they'll stop loving you. But I'm telling you that if women are free, they will love you better because they will be loving you by choice, not by necessity.
It's an incredibly modern way of viewing relationships.
Okay, I want to try something a bit different here. We've covered the main textual arguments, but to really see if her 18th century ideas hold water for you listening today, let's run 2 thought experiments.
Oh, I love these.
Just as a quick disclaimer for you listening, these following scenarios are philosophical playgrounds. They are strictly designed to test the logical limits of Wollstonecraft's arguments, and they are for entertainment and educational purposes only.
Duly noted. Let's do it.
All right, scenario 1, the male harem. Let's imagine a fictional society, call it Wollstonia.
Okay, Wollstonia.
And in this society, for over 300 years, men are designated as the, quote, fair sex, unquote. They are legally barred from owning any property, they cannot vote, and they are forbidden from learning mathematics or science.
Got it. So what do they do all day?
Their entire education from birth consists of dressing well, grooming their beards, and learning to sing or play instruments purely to please the ruling matriarchs who hold all the wealth.
So little boys are told from birth, don't worry your pretty little head about politics or business. Just look extremely handsome and try to catch a rich wife to support you.
Exactly. Now, the philosophical question is this. What happens to the male character in that environment over a few generations? Do they remain these stoic, hyper-rational philosophers? Or do they become vain, gossipy, and totally obsessed with mirrors?
Wollstonecraft would bet her entire house that they become vain and gossipy.
Right, because her core point is that femininity, at least how the 18th century rigidly defined it, all the pettiness and the vanity, isn't actually a female biological trait.
It is a subordinate trait.
Yes. It's just the basic human psychology of oppression. If you put biological men in that exact same tiny box, they will adapt and act exactly like the women that male writers love to mock.
Which beautifully proves her thesis that character is overwhelmingly an output of the system and the environment, not the DNA.
Precisely. Okay, let's move to scenario 2. This one is called the theological wager, and it is a bit heavier. Let's take the 18th century religious view completely literally. You have an immortal soul, and you will face a literal judgment day.
Okay, the stakes are high.
Imagine a woman, let's call her Sophie, in honor of Rousseau. And Sophie follows all the rules of her society perfectly. She shuts off her brain. She relies entirely on her husband to tell her what is right and wrong. She obeys every command blindly because that's what a good wife does.
Right.
Then she dies and stands before God at Judgment Day.
And God asks her, why did you do X, Y, and Z during your life?
And her only defense is, my husband told me to.
That is basically the Nuremberg defense applied to the household.
Exactly. Now, here is Wollstonecraft's brilliant trap. If Sophie is not held accountable by God because she was truly just following orders, then she isn't a moral agent.
She's effectively just an animal or a very well-programmed robot. She has no actual soul to save.
But if she is held accountable, if she truly has an immortal soul, then she had a divine duty to think for herself all along.
You cannot have it both ways. That is such a sharp argument. You cannot simultaneously say she has a soul capable of entering heaven and also say she doesn't need to develop her own reason.
Because if you deny her the right to reason, you are actively denying her salvation.
That is the ultimate wedge she drives into the culture. Wollstonecraft is telling these highly religious men, by actively keeping your wives ignorant and dependent, you are directly endangering their eternal souls. It completely raises the stakes from just basic social fairness to literal cosmic justice.
So looking back at the legacy of all this, it's no surprise she was viciously attacked for this book. She was famously called a, quote, hyena in petticoats, unquote, right?
Yeah, Horace Walpole called her that. She was completely reviled by polite society. People thought she was an absolute monster trying to destroy the family.
But the seed was planted.
It was. You really do not get the suffragettes, and you don't get the modern legal concept of universal human rights without this text breaking the ground first. It permanently severed the historical link between a person's sex and their capacity for virtue.
And for you listening today, the person who might be thinking, well, we solved this centuries ago, women can vote and own property now, what is the lingering takeaway from this text?
I think the most powerful lingering idea is her critique of the pleaser. We still have this immense societal pressure, heavily on women, but really on everyone in the social media age, to be primarily pleasing rather than deeply honest.
To curate an aesthetic rather than build a mind.
Exactly. Wollstonecraft is reaching across centuries to ask us to actively choose respect over adoration.
Adoration is cheap. Respect is earned.
And adoration is highly precarious. If you're only adored for your physical beauty or your agreeable nature, you'll be terrified of aging or making a mistake.
But if you are respected for the power of your mind, time is actually on your side. You only get better and sharper with age. That is a remarkably powerful thought to end on for you listening. Shift your personal assets from the depreciating column of beauty and compliance to the appreciating column of reason and character.
Keep thinking critically. That's the core message.
That's it for this deep dive into a vindication of the rights of women. Thanks for exploring the architecture of society with us.